Ani, I see your spirit. I'm back from the United States. I'm in Europe, getting ready to go meet with some parliaments here, and I wanted to take a moment to reflect on this last month. I think those that have been following what's occurring, I think that it's good to pause sometimes and reflect on where you're at, where it's going, what's happened. And you know, I think that what's often forgot, amidst those that are used to the normal routine of you grow up with your parents, you walk out the door, you get an education, you get a job, and you work till you die. That this system is the right system, and it's not. It's not the right system. And you know, technology, you see this as your normal plumb line. It's not. There was a period before technology came, a period where they said, we'll give you technology, and it will take these things that took large periods of time down to short periods of time. You get the same output. So instead of getting more time with your family as you thought, you now have less time with your family. And most children don't have time with their mothers and fathers throughout the day. And now they're educated. These are things to really reflect on. They're educated by people who can't even educate in the way that they are gifted or talented to do, that instead are following a curriculum established by people you'll never meet in far-off lands or cities, that keeps this cycle going. There's nothing more important in life than being part of a family and a community. And we've lost the ability to do that. Now, recently there's been some videos posted where I shared a lot of emotion, as I went back to my LDS side of my family after having walked to the highest levels on the tribal side of my family, and not all tribal peoples in North America are the same. This generalization causes a layer of frustration. It'd be the same as if we said all of Europe are just Europeans, knowing full well that the French and the German and the Italian and the Spanish and the English would all have quite a hard time accepting that they're all just the same, and that their unique individual stories didn't matter. We're talking about the Anishinaabe. We're talking about the Dudamog of the Anishinaabe. We're talking about the Midu of the Midday-Wee-Win, which apparently was all the way across the continent, as I just got back from Utah and I went to St. George to a place called Anasazi Ridge, where I walked through with my book of my scroll images and their meanings from the Great Lakes, and they were found there on the stones. A whole lodge written on the stones in rooms as I went through with the caretakers there and the people who are assisting in documenting, and I was able to explain to them just from my knowledge from the Great Lakes. I'm not trying to be a Bureau of Indian Affairs Indian. That's a sub-agency created in the 1820s. They don't determine the identity of an American's right to be an American. Your parent does. It's lineal. Just as they don't determine my right to be a member of my family. There are 975 tribal communities who at one point or a time have been recognized in the United States. Recognition by the federal government. This is just to explain some of the frustrations that occurred. I'm a human being. I'm not superhuman, I'm a human. I may have accomplished a lot in my life and been through a lot, but I'm a human. There's a point where the boiling and it's like, hey, listen, don't touch. But, you know, the United States federal government is a three-branch co-equal government. There's the judicial, there's the executive, and there's the legislative. The Constitution determines their roles and responsibilities. Article 6 of the Constitution declares that treaties are the supreme law of the land. And when the 1789 Constitution was passed and that article was listed there, it was enacted in equality with the 1789 Northwest Indian Ordinance, which determined west of what was the United 13 States, what was going to be the relationship under the Constitution. This was defined in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 that was reaffirmed in 1789 under the Constitution. This is forgotten about as we explain our frustrations that the United States Congress still has recognized over 900, the relationship and existence of 900 Indian communities. And it's called tribes. And the judicial upholds over 900 Indian tribes. Now, granted, they're a part of larger communities. It's the equivalent of comparing counties in the United States. But they're recognized. It's the executive branch in their desire to disperse a shrinking amount of money to mean more, that they have just chosen on their own in the 20th century, in the mid-1900s, on their own, without Congress and without the judicial, to just not recognize as the executive branch. And it's not even them. It's the Bureau of Indian Affairs under the Department of Interior that has just chosen to just dissolve and not recognize tribal communities. Over 400 of them. So imagine if you go, so there's 575 recognized and 400 that are not by the executive, but they are by the judicial and the legislative. And so if you say, well, you're not federally recognized, imagine how insulting that is to them when you say you're not Indian and where's your card and where's your paperwork and where's your birth certificate. And even if they're lucky enough like me to have a dad with an Indian number, or they have an Indian number, to even be asked for it is very insulting. It'd be like if you said you're an American and somebody said, well, I don't believe you until you give me your social security number. How would you feel having to provide your social security number? Not so good. It'd be very upsetting to you. This is why I was so emotionally upset. You have to understand, like, for me, this is my 7th year of a journey, where I waited until I was told I could talk. I had a grandmother that was an admitted failure as a mother. Admittedly. She wasn't able to be with her own family. I got some blisters. I was in like 100, I just want to let you know in case you're checking out. I was in like 110 degree weather in Utah. And I slept like 2 hours in 3 days. This is a side road here. And man, I got burned. Just incredible. But let me go back. So my grandmother couldn't be raised by her parents. It was 1948. She was 9 years old, playing in Belcourt, North Dakota, and the Indian agents just came and took her. Imagine how her mother and father felt. I mean, her father was quite a traveler. My great-grandpa was quite the traveler. But, it took 10 years for the mother to find her and moved all the way to Idaho trying to follow her daughter. Does that mean that my grandmother doesn't have the right to her family? She was drugged to a boarding school. Tens of thousands were drugged to boarding schools outside of the reservation camps they were placed within. And the same situation, you had broken families. So she didn't know how to be a mother, but what she knew was that she was afraid of what would occur to her children. And as a result, she left them with her husband, who then traveled quite a bit. I mean, she even took my grandpa and her went up to Alaska, which was a territory, to give birth to my dad, just to try to protect him. It's like we can't fathom these things. And it's hard for Americans today to say, well, it's not my fault. I didn't do it, and I didn't this and that. Imagine how the Germans feel. Imagine how the Germans feel today, where it's like now, like the great-great-grandchildren or the Jewish people existing and the Germans existing that have to still hear about what occurred with the Holocaust. And no one would question publicly their right to complain about it. But many of you do that with us. And as we're like the first ones that can talk about our moms and dads and grandmothers and grandfathers and what occurred. And you say, well, it's not our problem. It actually is. Even today when we go to courts, right? Your courts rule against us using policies and judgments from courts from the 1800s, when you admit that these were a racist, genocidal, really horrific time in American history. 1789 to 1920. You had to be like a white man. And for a large portion of that, a white man who owned land, to be a citizen. That the Declaration of Independence didn't apply to you unless you were a white man who owned land for a large portion of that 120-year period. And then white women. Like, you have to understand, it's difficult today for our generation to be in court and have those things cited. Imagine in Germany today, if they went to court and ruled against persons in Germany citing policies that were written by the Nazi government. And yet, How different was the Nazi government from the government of Andrew Jackson? I want you to really pause and reflect on that. You know, how are you expecting us to view ourselves as equals, even myself today, when you question our numbers, when you use forced blood quantum on who can be citizens within our communities, or the Bureau of Indian Affairs, responsibility and obligations to treaties based off of blood quantification, and then it doesn't exist anymore. No more money for these people. What a convenient thing to do. That's a genocide. That's already been ruled in international courts. And then you set aside, many of you set aside that in the 60s and 70s, and this, I'm not complaining about you, I'm saying, do you understand the passion and emotion of us speaking today as the first generation to grow up and attain a life where we can stand on our feet and you can't take something away from us. You can't take anything away from me. You can't. And I've got to the point where I could speak and you can't. The government sterilized 60% of our women. This is after the Geneva Convention in 1948. It was only like 1 year later they took my grandmother. All of these things up until 1978 in the U.S. are violations. 4 of the 5 provisions of genocide. Any accountability? No, you're just Americans. No, I'm not just an American. I'm an Anishinaabe, I'm an Ojibwe, I'm an Ojibwe. And if the 3 sounds confuse you, that's not my problem. I know my identity is 3 in 1. I'm a spirit lowered from a sacred place where the Creator dwells. I'm a spirit placed in a body. This is a sacred vessel carrying my spirit on a Anishinaabe, Ojibwe. And I am trying hard with every breath to do the right thing because I know I'm recording a vision. And it took a long time for me to figure that out. Lots of failures. But still, you point the fingers at each other about your failures. One mistake, and it takes away your voice forever. The most important breath you'll ever have after making a mistake is the very next one, and a commitment to not do it again. When the great peacemaker, Jesus Christ, came to us, right, in a perfected body, he jumped off of a tree just to prove to us that he had a different body. Maybe because he's a funny guy, or maybe because he knows that humans are blind and need signs. And stood up off the ground, by the way, unharmed. But he said that we have to treat each other like the mother. How did he know that? Don't you think that he loved his mother quite a bit? Don't you think that, when she asked him, she knew he was listening to his Father in heaven, and don't you think that she asked him, what are ears for? Listening, you need to listen when he was a child. Don't you think he struggled and grew just as we did? Maybe he had a longer experienced memory, but, he said, you have to, the path to him is through your heart. And it's just, you question, how should you, what does that mean? Where was your heart formed? This is my message to you. Your heart was formed in the womb of your mother. We go back there, just a few moments before that is your first experience in this world that we all share. He took the drum and beat the drum to remind us that's why we come together in a circle. That we first heard her heartbeat. We're not alone. We then felt that heartbeat. We're not alone. And then we knew that heart was in us. We're one. And all of us are one. Every mother on this planet is a matrilineal descendant of that first mother, that sacred mother that began this journey for us as a human race. So if you're someone like me who takes this obligation upon yourself, seriously, then when you are speaking in spiritual terms, you have the spiritual voice of your ancestors back in time, 7 generations with you. This is our promise, screaming for you to be their voice. You have the 7 generations unborn that are with you. That is our promise, screaming at you to be their voice. It's very easy for that spiritual emotion to come out in frustration for you that are blind. For you that are blind. That you're not just blind, you're deaf, and your hearts are hardened. That forget that you can certainly yourself go and research that the traditional beliefs of the Middu, of the Midday we win, of the Anishinaabe are very sacred. And when we talk to you about specific groups within that big family. And then those circling around us. You can't just group them all together. And you also can't come and attack us and prove our identity. And then I even saw on a podcast, Mormon discussions where they were literally in the show talking about Canadian Indians and American Indians as if they're different. They some reason forget the 1872 border was placed between one people. And are we not allowed to be frustrated? That your communities can speak as one, coast to coast, and ours cannot. That your communities will always be recognized, and your children in your communities, but ours cannot. That you can have rights to your resources and property, and a decision and negotiation, and we cannot. That you have services that are built upon a foundation of wealth garnered from our resources that are still in our name, that we get a couple billion collectively, while you report your government every year, they get trillions, it's like with a T, annually. It'd be the equivalent if someone came and worked your property for $100, and they made $100 off it. And then they tried to give you like 0.2 of a cent in return. You'd say, well, that's not fair. And then judged you about why you're struggling. Things to think about and consider. So I hope that this poem will help you understand a little bit more about the emotion of being the first generation able to speak, and then to face this Eurocentric continuance of this idea about our people, that it's because you've been trained by the Department of Education in books that call us savages, and your Declaration of Independence still says we're savages. Well, I might be the most educated and articulate savage you ever met, and I'm calling you the savage. And if the shoe fits, wear it. But I'll tell you this, if technology came and said, we're going to take this, and you'll do it in this amount of time, and then they take all your time and more, do I have a right to be upset that you're at war with my unborn generations that are screaming through me to tell you they have a right to water and air and movement? That you can't trap them in deserts or in lands that cannot sustain one generation, let alone 7. That you've placed us in reservations, you call them nations, and they lack sovereignty. Total sovereignty. You promised, as you took everything and you still manage it, your government, your parties, these two snakes fighting at each other right now, and you look at it and it's poison to your family and your children and your community. Go to an inner city, the promise of this great gift is now rotting from the center of the cities outward. Rotten fruit that cannot bear fruit. And we're asking you to question, is that what's best for you? Is that what's best for your family? And are you angry at us because we will stand up and defend our right as equally as you would the Constitution that you don't even hold your leadership accountable to follow? I know it hurts and it angers to never feel free. To think of what has been taken, the lost native dreams of swift feet on open lands, the drum beats where the teepee stands, the call of the hunt and the buffalo breath upon frosted earth, I know you can never forget. They cannot take away what is in your heart. There is no losing what was never theirs. And yet, amidst the disillusion of the little that is left, too many worry if their blood is enough to come home. Unity is the Creator's great gift, that sacred red road from the sparkling stars of your grandchild's eyes. Can you still hear your Creator's voice upon the wind? Can you see the soaring eagle high in the sky calling for you? To wipe the tears from tomorrow's years. It's time to be free. It's time to be free. And we're not just talking about us. We're talking about you as well. It's time to be free. Miigwech. I'll talk to you later, and I'll try to channel some of those screaming from my ancestors and my generations against some of the real blindness and racism and generalizations of that we're experiencing right now. And I hope that you can understand my heart and what I'm saying right now. That we, to stand the teepee up requires 3 poles bound as one for all the other poles, peoples to rest upon. This is a teaching that discipline and respect and humility are required for all other things to rest upon. And it's time that we start living these principles. To think, speak, and act with wisdom, respect, humility, honesty, truth, courage, and love. The sacred 7 grandfather teachings that you would also call the 7 Noahide laws, given to all the children and descendants of Noah to follow. That there's wisdom in knowing that all things have one source. There's respect in giving respect to all things because they come from that one source. That we show humility because amidst all of the things of creation, humanity is very sacred and special, if not made in the very reflective image of that creating source. That we show honesty when that's true. What has been given, ordained, or gathered by one human is not yours to take away or remove. Wisdom, respect, humility, honesty, truth, and when that's true, you must look around and know that all the other Ojibwe, the spirits that are in bodies of the plants and animals, and those of the sea and the sky, that they're on a journey too. And it's your responsibility to show restraint and not to remove from them unnecessarily what is their right in their experience with the Creator. That we have the courage to think every single day, speak every single day, and live every single day that we're in a spirit in a temple called a body, and to keep this sacred. And we've all fell short and fallen, but it's not your job to point that into everybody's face in every breath they're trying to be better. That we show love when we know all these things are true, and we think, speak, and act, and live these things. That it allows us to show equity and love to all things that we encounter, surround, we're a part of. Because we have to accept that it's a gift. Heaven is a gift. It's a gift that none of us deserve. Because only those that would deal equally with the widow, beggar, orphan, and professing sinner as equally with their child, spouse, sibling, and professing saint are worthy of heaven. But I'm grateful that I'm on this little beautiful blue, green, brown, rainbow-colored miracle we call Earth, falling through infinite darkness with a big ball of fire floating in the sky next to us. I'm just glad to be here with you. But I think that we can do better. We can be more and do more when we start thinking from our hearts. All right, Miigwech.